What if I told you that electric cars ruled the streets long before combustion engines took over? Yes, long before gasoline became the standard, there were quiet, efficient vehicles, far more advanced than we usually imagine. But then something happened. These cars vanished, almost as if they had never existed. Why? Who benefited from their disappearance? How did a technology that could have completely transformed the world get buried without a trace? What I'm about to tell you might change the way you see the history of automobiles. If you think electric cars are a modern innovation, think again. The truth is, they were already popular in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And we're not talking about experimental prototypes or failed projects. Fully functional electric models were driving around cities, used by business owners, politicians, and even high society elites of the time. The future looked bright, but suddenly this technology was wiped out, and the reasons behind it are far darker than you might think. Picture this, living in an era where the roar of combustion engines didn't exist, where streets were filled with silent electric vehicles that produced no pollution and could be charged right at home. That was reality in the year 1900. Some of the largest cities in the world already had fleets of electric taxis, motorized carriages that didn't need gasoline, and even privately owned battery-powered vehicles. Early electric. Cars were easy to drive, didn't require a crank to start, and didn't spew clouds of smoke. So what went wrong? Why was this revolution cut short? And who made sure electric cars never became the industry standard? The strangest part is that back then, these vehicles had clear advantages that should have guaranteed their dominance. While the first gasoline cars were noisy, hard to start, and required physical strength to crank the engine, electric cars were comfortable and reliable. Their range was already enough for most city trips, and charging stations were becoming common in many urban areas. So why did the world choose gasoline? Or rather, was it even a choice at all? Or was there something much more sinister behind that decision? Now, take a look at today's world. After more than 100 years, electric cars are once again being called the future of mobility. But why did it take so long for them to make a comeback? What held back their progress for over a century? Could it be that the same forces that buried electric vehicles back then are still at work today? Stay with me, because over the next few minutes, we're going to dive deep into documents, hidden facts, and events that explain this forgotten history. If you think electric cars disappeared because the technology wasn't ready, just wait until you see the evidence of what really happened. This wasn't about innovation. It was about multi-billion-dollar interests manipulating the market to make sure oil became essential. Who controlled the auto industry? Who had the most to gain from electric cars failing? The answers are out there, and you might be shocked to learn who profited from this shift. And don't make the mistake of thinking this is just a story from the past. The very same challenges that blocked electric cars back then are still present today. Issues like infrastructure, high production costs, and dependence on certain strategic industries continue to shape the market. Are we repeating the same mistakes? Or is there something even bigger happening behind the scenes of the automotive industry? Now that you understand the real impact of this disappearance, it's time to dig deeper. Let's uncover the true reasons electric cars were erased from history, who was pulling the strings, and how that decision shaped the world we live in today. But before we move on, there's one important thing I need to tell you. If you want to keep seeing content like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, because this kind of information doesn't always show up for you again. Algorithms don't always recommend videos that expose truths like this, and if you're not subscribed, you might miss the next shocking revelations. Now, think about this. More than 100 years later, we are still facing the exact same obstacles. Electric cars have made a comeback, but they continue to face resistance. Traditional automakers were slow to embrace the shift. The price of electric vehicles remains high, and the charging infrastructure is expanding at a painfully slow pace. All of this is happening while the big oil companies still dominate the energy market, and governments continue to make decisions that seem to favor only one side of this battle. So, have we finally reached the tipping point, or are we about to watch this technology get crushed all over again? The most troubling part is that most people have no idea this story even exists. The version of Automotive history, we were taught, was carefully shaped over time. They told us that electric cars were never practical, that gasoline was always the smarter choice, and that the changes in the industry happened naturally. But is that really the truth? Or was the outcome rigged to serve the interests of a powerful few? What happened back then might be happening again, right now, in front of our eyes. And if you want to follow this investigation to the very end, you need to make sure this information keeps reaching you. So, turn on notifications and stay tuned, because what I'm about to show you next could completely change the way you see the automotive industry. Now let's get to the real question. Who profited from the disappearance of electric cars, and why did it take so long for this technology to return? Get ready, because what comes next is going to surprise you. At the end of the 19th century, electric cars were market leaders. In the year 1900, around 30% of all vehicles in the United States were electric. They were quiet, produced no pollution, and didn't need gasoline. But something happened, and this innovation disappeared. It wasn't a natural process, an inevitable transition, or a technological failure. Electric cars didn't lose the race to combustion engines because they were inferior. Quite the opposite. They had every advantage to dominate the market, but they were taken down deliberately. So, who was behind it? Who decided that the future of mobility had to depend on oil? The answer to that question leads to a story of multi-billion-dollar interests, political lobbying, and a level of manipulation that reshaped history itself. At the turn of the century, electric cars were the obvious choice for wealthy buyers who wanted comfort and convenience. They made no noise, didn't require a complicated hand crank to start, didn't release toxic fumes, and were incredibly easy to drive. Meanwhile, gasoline-powered cars were loud, dirty, and difficult to operate. In almost every way, electric vehicles offered a superior experience. So, what went wrong? The first blow to electric cars came from technological progress itself. The batteries of that era, while effective, still couldn't support long-distance travel, limiting electric vehicles to city driving. But this was only a temporary hurdle. Battery development was moving forward rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before that problem was solved. So, why was electric vehicle development halted, while combustion engines received overwhelming support? The answer can be summed up in one word: oil. Powerful oil tycoons realized that if electric cars became the norm, their entire source of wealth would be at risk. The rise of electric vehicles would mean no need for gas stations on every corner, no need to pump millions of barrels of oil every year just to fuel a growing fleet of cars. This was a threat they simply could not afford to ignore. And so, a powerful campaign began. One designed to slow down electric car development and push combustion engines to the forefront. Gasoline was produced on a massive scale and sold at dirt-cheap prices. At the same time, car manufacturers poured all their resources into developing combustion engines, abandoning any serious investment in electric vehicles. But the final blow came with the invention of one specific device: the electric starter motor. Up until that point, gasoline-powered cars were infamous for how difficult they were to start. Drivers had to crank a heavy handle to get the engine running, a process that was not only inconvenient, but downright dangerous. There were even cases of people breaking their arms while trying to start their vehicles. This flaw had always been one of the biggest selling points for electric cars, which could be powered on with a simple press of a button. But everything changed when the electric starter motor was developed and installed in gasoline cars. That single innovation erased one of the main reasons people preferred electric vehicles in the first place. Suddenly, combustion engines could be started effortlessly, closing the gap that once gave electric such a clear advantage. But it wasn't just technological advances that buried electric vehicles. There was also a fierce political game designed to make sure this transition became permanent. In many cities, electric public transportation companies were bought out by groups connected to the oil industry. And not long after, these systems were shut down entirely. Electric streetcars, which were once a common sight in urban centers, started to vanish, replaced by gasoline or diesel-powered buses. And don't be fooled into thinking this was just some natural evolution in transportation. Companies like General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone were all accused of conspiring to dismantle electric streetcar systems, ensuring that fossil fuels would become the only viable option for future transportation. As time went on, the very idea of an electric car faded from public memory. Entire generations grew up believing cars had always run on gasoline, that this was the only practical option, and that electric vehicles were nothing more than a failed experiment. But the truth is, this was a forced decision, not some inevitable result of progress. And now, more than 100 years later, electric vehicles are finally making a comeback, facing many of the exact same challenges from the past. If electric cars existed for so long, why did it take more than 100 years for them to return to the market? What blocked this technology from evolving and becoming the standard, instead of a rare exception? And why, even today, are there so many barriers keeping electric vehicles out of reach for the average consumer? The challenges are still here. Price is still an issue. Charging infrastructure is growing slowly, and there's a heavy reliance on lithium mining for battery production. But there's something even more alarming. Are we witnessing a new wave of sabotage happening right in front of us? Could the same interests that buried electric cars in the past be regrouping to stop this transition once again? Leave a comment and tell us what you think. Were electric cars sabotaged, or were they simply not ready for the market? Do you believe powerful interests are still working to block this shift? Type, "I want to know the truth" in the comments to help more people uncover this story. Let's keep going, because the next part of this investigation might completely change the way you see the future of electric vehicles. Electric cars didn't disappear by accident. The oil industry, automakers, and even governments all had too much to lose if electric technology took over. For these industries, a car that didn't rely on gasoline and required far less maintenance wasn't just inconvenient, it was a threat. That's when the attacks on electric cars began. First came the disinformation campaigns, spreading the belief that electric cars were unreliable, fragile, and incapable of competing with combustion engines. Newspapers, many funded by oil-backed groups, published stories pushing the narrative that electric vehicles were nothing more than a passing curiosity with no real future. At the same time, governments introduced incentives and regulations designed to favor gasoline engines, such as massive investments in gas, station infrastructure, and lower taxes on fossil fuels. But the real knockout punch came directly from within the automotive industry itself. Major automakers realized there was far more money to be made with gasoline-powered cars. An electric vehicle at the time was simpler to build and required far less maintenance. It didn't need frequent oil changes, didn't have a complex engine filled with moving parts prone to wear and tear, and, most importantly, it didn't force drivers to return to the gas station every few days. That meant less revenue for automakers and, more crucially, for the entire fossil fuel supply chain. To make sure electric vehicles never gained real popularity, manufacturers began sabotaging the technology, abandoning battery development and shifting all their focus to producing combustion engines. At the same time, cities themselves were being reshaped to accommodate gasoline-powered cars. In the United States, urban planning started revolving around having gas. Stations on every corner, electric streetcars, one of the most efficient modes of transportation at the time, were systematically shut down and replaced by diesel-powered buses. Big oil giants like Standard Oil had a clear interest in making sure cities became completely dependent on oil to keep moving. The lobbying power these companies held over the government played a critical role, ensuring that any attempt to bring back electric vehicles would be quickly shut down for decades to come. Over time, the very idea of an electric car became almost laughable. Advertisements of the era mocked electric vehicles, portraying them as weak, outdated, and incapable of competing with the powerful new V8 engines. Consumer culture played into this narrative too. The American dream became directly linked to the roar of combustion engines, the thunderous growl of muscle cars, and the thrill of the open road fueled by gasoline. No one wanted a quiet, subtle car when they could drive a beast that roared down the highway. But what most people never knew was that, behind the scenes, a handful of engineers and inventors were still fighting to keep electric technology alive. Throughout the mid-20th century, several innovative electric vehicle projects were developed, many funded independently by visionaries who believed electric cars still had a future. However, every time one of these projects started gaining traction, something suspicious would happen. Either the company would be quietly bought out by a major automaker and the project would vanish, or production costs would mysteriously skyrocket, making mass production impossible. In some cases, regulations were conveniently altered, creating legal barriers that blocked these vehicles from reaching the market. One of the most infamous cases was the story of the EV1, a revolutionary electric car developed by General Motors in the 1990s. This vehicle featured cutting-edge technology for its time, with an aerodynamic design and impressive performance. Drivers who got to experience the EV1 often described it as the future of the automobile. But then something bizarre happened. General Motors itself, the very company that invested millions into developing the car, suddenly decided to recall every single model from the streets and destroy them all. The EV1 simply disappeared, and any attempt to question this decision was swiftly shut down by the company. Leaked documents later revealed that pressure from the oil industry, along with influence from other automakers, was the real reason the car was erased. It simply wasn't in their best interest for an affordable, efficient electric car to reach the mass market. Now, more than 100 years after the first electric cars hit the streets, the technology is fighting for a comeback. But will things really be different this time? The automotive industry has undergone massive transformations in recent decades, and battery technology has finally advanced enough to make electric vehicles a real option for millions of drivers. Yet the barriers still remain. Electric cars are still expensive, charging infrastructure is still underdeveloped, and a new dependency has emerged: lithium. The mining of this crucial metal, essential for modern batteries, is already sparking new geopolitical battles and conflicts of interest between corporations and governments. The big question now is this: will the same powerful interests that buried electric cars in the past allow this technology to finally dominate the market? Or are we just seeing a new version of the same conspiracy, only with different players this time? What's really driving the decisions made by major automakers? Do they truly want to make electric cars accessible to everyone? Or are they simply controlling the pace of the transition to make sure they keep profiting from combustion engines for as long as possible? If you feel like this story still hasn't been fully explained, leave a comment below. Do you believe electric cars will finally take over the streets? Or do you think hidden forces are still working to prevent this shift? And if you want to follow this investigation all the way to the end, subscribe to the channel right now, because there's always a chance this information won't make it to your feed again. One of the most advanced electric cars from the early 20th century was the Baker Electric, launched in the year 1912. It had a range of up to 160 kilometers, comparable to many modern electric vehicles, and yet this technology was abandoned. Historical records indicate that major automakers received financial incentives to prioritize gasoline-powered vehicles, effectively burying electric cars for decades. That raises a very important question: why would such an efficient, practical electric vehicle, one that already offered a real solution for urban transportation, simply disappear from the market? Who stood to gain by ensuring electric vehicles were erased while gasoline cars became the only viable option? At that time, electric vehicles were becoming a serious threat to the oil industry's dominance. Besides the Baker Electric, other models were emerging with the potential to redefine mobility, including the Detroit Electric and electric vehicles developed by Thomas Edison, who personally invested heavily in creating more efficient batteries. These vehicles provided a reliable alternative to combustion engines, and if they had continued to evolve, the world today could look very different, perhaps without our near-total dependence on fossil fuels. But the oil industry saw the danger very early. John D. Rockefeller, one of the most powerful men in the world at the time, had built a multi-billion-dollar empire through oil extraction and distribution with his company, Standard Oil. He knew that if electric cars became mainstream, his monopoly on transportation, fuel, would collapse. And Rockefeller wasn't the only one. Henry Ford, whose Model T revolutionized the auto industry, also recognized that combustion engines gave him a chance to build an extremely profitable mass production system. while electric cars still depended on technological advancements that could slow down large-scale adoption. That's when a coordinated effort began to stall electric vehicle development. The first step was to control the public narrative. Newspapers, many with financial ties to the oil industry, started spreading the idea that electric cars were nothing more than a temporary fad, a luxury for the wealthy, but never a practical solution for the general population. Meanwhile, gasoline was aggressively marketed, and gas stations popped up on every corner, making combustion engines increasingly more convenient than electric vehicles. The final blow came with the development of the electric starter motor, invented by Charles Kettering in the year 1912. Before this invention, gasoline cars were notoriously difficult to start, requiring a heavy crank that was not only inconvenient, but often dangerous, causing serious injuries to drivers. That ease of starting was one of the biggest advantages electric cars had over their gasoline counterparts. You could power them up with just a simple switch, but once the electric starter arrived, that advantage vanished. Now, gasoline vehicles were not only cheaper to mass produce, but also just as easy to operate. That's when electric cars began losing ground fast, and the rest is history. Beyond corporate and technological manipulation, there was also heavy political influence. Starting in the 1920s, governments began investing heavily in building highways and infrastructure designed specifically for combustion engines. In cities like New York and Chicago, electric streetcars, which had already proven to be an efficient mode of transportation, were gradually shut down, often under pressure from companies that profited from selling diesel and gasoline-powered buses. This wasn't a coincidence. Historical documents show that companies like General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone were all accused of conspiring to dismantle electric transit systems and force cities to adopt combustion vehicles. With this perfect storm of factors, electric cars were pushed into obscurity. Automakers that once invested in electric technology simply abandoned their projects, often under pressure from investors tied to the oil industry. Some companies even received tax breaks and government subsidies to focus exclusively on gasoline engines. Any attempt to revive electric vehicles was quickly shut down, either through artificial financial hurdles or regulatory changes that made commercializing these vehicles nearly impossible. The result was a full century dominated by oil. The world was shaped around fossil fuels, with wars fought over access to strategic oil reserves and an automotive industry completely dependent on a global network of refineries, pipelines, and gas stations. Consumer culture reinforced this dependence, linking combustion engines with status, power, and freedom. Meanwhile, the idea of a clean, affordable, efficient electric car began to feel like a distant fantasy, something almost utopian. But did that sabotage really end? Today, more than 100 years after the Baker electric vehicles are back in the spotlight. Companies like Tesla have proven that it's possible to build electric cars that work for the mass market. And traditional automakers who resisted the shift for decades are now pouring billions into catching up. But will this time really be different? Or are we watching a new version of the same power struggle that buried electric cars the first time? What most people don't realize is that, even today, there are forces actively working to slow down this transition. Electric cars are still expensive for many people, the charging infrastructure is growing far too slowly, and a new dependency is already emerging: lithium mining. Lithium, the critical ingredient in modern batteries, is quickly becoming the next battleground, with powerful players fighting for control over its extraction and trade. Are we simply replacing one problem with another? Is the oil monopoly just being swapped out for a lithium monopoly? The challenges we face today aren't all that different from the ones electric cars faced over a century ago. While some companies are pushing for progress, others are still investing heavily in fossil fuels, ensuring the transition happens at the most profitable pace for them. At the same time, government policies don't always support faster adoption, and disinformation campaigns remain a powerful weapon to sow doubt among the public. How many times have you heard someone say that electric cars aren't actually sustainable, or that they'll never fully replace combustion engines? These are the exact same tactics used over 100 years ago to discredit this technology. If this story feels familiar, maybe that's because we still haven't broken free from the same cycle. The real question is, will electric cars finally take over the market? Or are we standing at the edge of yet another setback? Are the same powerful forces that killed electric cars the first time still working behind the scenes, waiting for the perfect moment to slow things down all over again? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe electric vehicles will finally replace combustion cars? Or do you think hidden interests are still blocking the way? Today, electric cars are making a comeback, but they still face many of the same challenges. Charging infrastructure, high costs, and the influence of the oil industry continue to act as barriers. Are we watching history repeat itself? That's not just a rhetorical question. It's a reality unfolding right before our eyes. History shows us that every time a new technology threatened powerful monopolies, there was resistance. And with electric vehicles, it's no different. On one hand, there's a massive push to make this transition feel inevitable. Governments announce bold plans to phase out combustion engines. Automakers unveil new electric models every year, and the media repeats the message that the age of fossil fuels is coming to an end. But at the same time, there are obstacles that seem almost strategically placed to slow this revolution down and make sure it doesn't become affordable and accessible too quickly. Electric vehicles are still far more expensive than most people can afford. Charging networks are expanding at a snail's pace, and public policies still quietly favor fossil fuels in ways that aren't always immediately obvious. If we look back at history, we'll see this pattern of resistance is nothing new. In the 1990s, General Motors introduced the EV1, a revolutionary electric car that could have changed the industry forever. It was efficient, had solid range for its time, and drivers who got to test it loved the experience. But just like the Baker Electric nearly 1 century earlier, the EV1 mysteriously disappeared. General Motors recalled every single unit, destroyed them, and never spoke of the car again. The official reason? Lack of demand. But internal documents and testimonies from former executives revealed that pressure from the oil industry played a decisive role in killing the project. That same excuse, lack of demand, is still used today to justify the slow pace of electric vehicle adoption. But is there really no demand for electric cars? Or is this narrative still being pushed to slow down a transition that threatens a multi-billion-dollar industry? Take a look around you. How many fast-charging stations do you see in your city? How many real incentives exist to make electric vehicles affordable for the average person? The answer to those questions is a direct reflection of the control the oil industry still holds over the global economy. If there's one thing we've learned from the history of electric vehicles, it's that having the technology isn't enough. For a true revolution, you need the biggest players in the market to want it to happen. When it came to combustion engines, there was a clear financial incentive to push that technology. Enormous profits from gasoline sales, a complex supply chain that guaranteed only a handful of companies could dominate, and a business model built on continuous dependence. Electric cars, however, represent a completely different model. An electric vehicle has fewer moving parts, requires less maintenance, and doesn't force drivers to constantly return to gas stations. That means automakers and oil companies stand to lose a massive stream of recurring revenue. And this is where things get even more concerning. While the sabotage of electric cars used to happen behind closed doors, today it's happening right out in the open, but in a much more subtle way. The negative propaganda against electric vehicles is still going strong, whether it's through misleading stories about limited range, high repair costs, or batteries that won't last. In many cases, these claims are either greatly exaggerated or flat-out false, but if they're repeated enough, they become accepted as truth by the average consumer. How many times have you heard someone say that electric cars aren't really sustainable because their batteries are harmful to the environment? Conveniently, this argument ignores the reality that producing gasoline and diesel is far more destructive to the planet. But perhaps the most fascinating piece of this new battle against electric cars is the fight to control the raw materials essential for battery production. Lithium, the primary component in lithium-ion batteries, has become the industry's new white gold. major corporations. And governments are already locked in geopolitical struggles over who will control the world's lithium reserves, ensuring that, just like with oil, only a small group holds power over its extraction and distribution. Do you see the pattern? We've moved away from a system built around the domination of oil, only to replace it with a new system centered around the domination of lithium. So, are we truly breaking free from the past? Or are we just swapping out the players while keeping the same script? And lithium isn't the only critical factor. There's also charging infrastructure. Governments and companies love to announce ambitious plans to install massive networks of charging stations, but in reality, the rollout is happening at a pace that's far slower than it needs to be. In many countries, the lack of charging points is still one of the biggest reasons why people hesitate to switch to electric vehicles. Now, ask yourself, who benefits from that slow progress? If, tomorrow, every gas station suddenly had a fast charger, how many people would still choose to buy a gasoline-powered car? There's another interesting piece to this puzzle: the resistance that many automakers showed up until very recently when it came to electric vehicles. For decades, companies like Ford, Volkswagen, and Toyota downplayed the importance of electric cars, insisting that the market wasn't ready or that the technology wasn't viable. It wasn't until companies like Tesla, BYD, and others started dominating the electric space that those legacy automakers suddenly changed their tune. But does this shift actually mean they're fully committed to leaving combustion engines behind? Or are they just playing along to make sure they stay in control of the market, while keeping the transition slow and profitable for themselves? And perhaps the most suspicious aspect of this new electric era is how dependent the big automakers have become on government subsidies. Much of the progress in electric technology has been heavily funded through tax incentives and public investments. But here's the big question: what happens if those incentives disappear? If the financial support dries up, will these companies still be committed to electric vehicles, or will they quietly shift back to prioritizing combustion engines? It's a question few people are asking, but the answer could decide the real future of electric mobility. So, we come back to the original question: are we watching history repeat itself? The challenges may look different, and the tactics have evolved, but the underlying interests remain exactly the same. Just like more than 100 years ago, electric vehicles were sabotaged to ensure gasoline took over the world. Today, there are forces at work making sure this transition happens under their control, and at the most profitable speed for the industries involved. If history has taught us anything, it's that nothing happens by accident. The future of electric mobility may look inevitable, but will it really be accessible to everyone? Or will it continue to be controlled by the same powerful interests that shaped the automotive industry in the 20th century? Let us know what you think in the comments. Will electric cars finally take over? Or are there hidden barriers we still can't see? Do you believe that the oil monopoly is just being replaced by a lithium monopoly? And don't stop here. What you've seen so far is just the beginning. If you thought this story was shocking, you need to know this was only the first chapter. There's another case, even more recent, and just as disturbing: the story of the EV1, the perfect electric car that was destroyed by the very company that created it. Want to understand how and why this happened? Then watch the next video right now and uncover how this conspiracy lived on well into the 1990s. Click on the next video showing up on your screen and dive into the next chapter of this hidden story.